Podcasting is the hottest topic in media right now, and that presents some great opportunities for your radio station. Today, with the help of a podcasting expert, we're going to run down the 5 top reasons why your radio station should be podcasting right now.
You're listening to Better Radio Websites, the definitive podcast for radio professionals who want their websites to generate more traffic and substantial revenue. Get time-tested techniques, secret tricks, and valuable tools in online content, marketing, analytics, security, social media, and much more. Ready for your radio station to dominate digital in your market? Here we go.
Hi, it's Jim, and welcome to Better Radio Websites, the podcast that wants to help you get more visitors and the most revenue from your radio station website. And that includes podcasting, too. You know, the podcasting audience, it continues to grow. It's reinvigorating audio listening in general and advertising that's associated with it. An Edison Research study shows that over a half of all Americans have listened to a podcast. 1/3 have listened to a podcast within the last week. 41% of Americans say that they listen to more podcasts now than they did a year ago. The average podcast listener tunes in 7 shows during the normal week and listens up to 6 hours each week. So whether you like it or not, podcasting is mainstream media right now. And that presents some great opportunities for you. This week, we want to offer up 5 reasons why your radio station should be podcasting. And we've enlisted the help of a podcasting expert. Mike Wilkerson is the owner of the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network out of St. Louis. Mike has been hosting, producing, concepting, enhancing podcasts since 2005. Back in 2005, did you ever hear the word podcasting? Well, Mike was doing it back then. He produces content for a growing client list across the nation. He does it remotely via his podcast capture studios there in St. Louis. He also has the podcast Bug, a 1974 Super Beetle that's been customized to have a podcast studio within the front of it. It's absolutely amazing. We'll talk to Mike about it. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
What a pleasure, Jim. We've had some technical hoops to jump through this morning, but geez, that's podcasting.
Of course, absolutely. And, you know, podcasting isn't supposed to be perfect, though, is it? Or is it?
You know, just in this last month, I've latched onto a live program that I have to be honest, I've not done a lot of live programming ever inside of my 18 years of podcasting. And so this is a fun little needling exercise for Mike Wilkerson brain and skill set, because there's always something that goes sideways whenever you're not expecting it.
Sure.
And I'm gleeful that my boss on this contract job that I've got to produce this program understands that tech is going to happen, because it does.
Sure. And you say you've been doing this for 18 years. How'd you get started?
I started in the vein of entertainment. The 24 podcast is where I sowed my oats. Originally, I started with a friend. We were doing a program called the Lunchtime Gab. And the Lunchtime Gab was where he and I would abscond from work at lunch, do a quick podcast, and then return back, i.e. Lunchtime Gab. And inside of that program, we were talking about a program on Fox called 24. 24 was Jack Bauer and explosions and counterterrorism and all this other cool stuff. And he and I had a little piece and segment inside the Lunchtime Gab that then grew into its own program, which eventually turned into the official 24 fan podcast. So when you went to fox.com/24/fans, you got me and my co-host and a giant audience and an engine of people that I instantly recognized as something I needed to tap. And so I did. And that is now a little bit less than 18 years ago, but year and a half-ish is when we started in. So 16-ish years is what we've been doing, something where there's this massive wad of people that come and listen to the variety of programming we have, and we do something with it. And that was Two Guys Talking back in end of 2006 into 2007.
Wow. And how many podcasts would you say were out there and doing that kind of thing back in 2006, 2005?
Well, see, I think we're still doing something that a lot of podcasts, especially podcast networks, don't do. So I don't know that I can tell you that there are a whole lot of podcast networks that are doing what we're doing. I've been able to tap a vein that has provided me a good solid income over the course of especially the last 10 years, where it's kind of a rinse and repeat thing where I'm looking to try and find space to make it grow. And this live program that I've latched onto has the gears and pistons and machinations to help me find that next step to grow into something that's even greater than what I made with two guys talking.
Okay. Now I have to know, what is this program that you're doing?
Well, sure. The program I'm doing right now, I'm the producer of a program called Cancel This.
Mm-hmm.
It's the launch venture of a canceled local St. Louis anchorman named Vic Faust.
Mm-hmm.
And my pitch to him on the program was, everybody in life has a skill set and a perspective. And I have now for 18 years captured perspectives as a profession.
Okay.
And so the conversation he and I had was, nobody is ever going to want to put on the astronaut suit that you have right now as the canceled anchorman astronaut. And that instantly perked his ears up and he said, tell me more. And so I met with him and a couple of other people that he'd had some radio success with. And it has evolved and turned into this show that is cancel culture education, which is something I also have always fostered inside of my content. There's always a vein of education. There's always some sort of light bulb moment that can be shared inside of whatever you learn, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what you're listening to over at twoguystalking.com via the data core. You're always going to have some light bulb moment inside of each of the programs, no matter who's the host, no matter what the program is.
It looks like you're having a big light
something.
bulb moment there in the background.
Oh yeah. Or do we have the wonderful flashiness going on again?
Yeah.
You know what it is? It's Mr. Mike's white skin. I hope to score a tanning sponsor.
Oh, that's great. No, you have some LED light problems, I guess, going on there, but that's cool. Please, I did not mean to interrupt you there, but
Sure.
I just saw your light bulb
What might
moment.
help? I don't strip off on camera, but for you, I might. Hold on. What might help is if I don't have a black coat on, so that might help too.
Oh no, you're still in the dance club.
Oh, okay. Kick ass. Who else is going to be a guest for you like this, Jim?
That's great. That's amazing. All right, so but look, we'll work with the lights. I just hope anybody doesn't have any seizures. But anyway, how does your network help podcasters though?
The concept of the podcast network was this: if you take something that's good and you surround yourself with other good things, regardless of the flavor, regardless of the topic, surrounding the good with more good makes the whole greater. And
Gotcha.
I have found that especially inside of small business, that's been a wonderful beacon, which might actually be why this whole thing is flashing. But it's been not only a great message, but it's a great signpost. It allows people to come and see this cacophony of history and topics and things that, like, they don't all puzzle piece together really at all.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a little something for everybody. And if you have an interest in this that you came to listen to, you know what? I want to go over here and check out this other thing that I've got. And that's always benefited me. It's also helped me make a lot of really great business relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and also score a whole bunch of work because I've got a good, solid, varied skill set.
I got you. Do you think it's better for a new podcast to become a part of a network? I mean, obviously you got some skin in that game, but I mean, just anybody.
Podcast network is not for everybody. That
Okay.
might shock everybody that hears something like that, especially as a guy that runs a podcast network. Podcast networks are not for everybody. If you're looking for someone to give you some structure and to help make sure that you feel like you have skin in your own podcast game, which frankly, I think is one of the magic elixirs that's missing today in podcasting, then you want to join my network. What I would always tell people about other networks is that you want to be careful that you're going to end up owning everything that you make, because if you don't, that's a problem.
Sure. Absolutely. The podcasts that you make, do you help them monetize their podcasts?
I do. And what I always focus on too is, again, we talked about that astronaut experience. I try to find what the _ astronaut experience is for whomever's coming onto the network. Each of them has a ballywick. Each of them has a series of skill sets or a perspective that nobody else has.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone that's curious, that's what the internet was made for, was to help people understand and find the things that are not only not common, but that you simply can't get somewhere else. That's why when I latch onto someone like Vic Faust, the canceled Anchorman astronaut, well, that's what you get. And you're not going to find that perspective anywhere else except cancelthisshow.com.
I got you. All right, fantastic. And do you do all this within a studio, or is it all within this podcast bug that I've been hearing about?
I started out of my basement. We probably don't have enough time today to share why I got out of my basement. It's a great story, though. We'll share it sometime. Anyway, this is another different studio that was built specifically for Cancel This, which, by the way, you can find more out about over at cancelthisshow.com.
Mm-hmm.
The studio I'm in currently is a micro studio. It's built into a retail space so that during the day I can, I've got a portion of that retail space that's essentially walled off. Mm-hmm. But after 6 o'clock, I then have a completely silent area where I can affect either voiceover recordings, ADR sessions, or podcasting.
Or dance club.
Or dance club, if I've got the lights working like they are in here, for sure.
And this podcast bug, what is that?
The podcast bug is a 1974 custom Super Beetle with a recording studio built into the front of it. I issue that out to conventions. The most recent convention we were at was one called FinCon. FinCon is the world's largest financial blogger and podcaster convention. And during that weekend, we were able to score over 300 different programs across 3 different days.
Wow. All out of that bug.
And by the way, it's a kick-ass car. Did I mention that part? And it runs. It's essentially a race car. The only thing that's the original on it is the actual frame of it, but the paint, the engine, the wheels, the tire, all of it. It's a little race car.
That's absolutely amazing. All right. Yeah. Well, Mike, now today I wanted to give radio stations 5 reasons why they should be podcasting. And I wanted to have you on kind of to get your take on each one of these, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
All right. Number 1 is consider podcast as on-demand radio, not as radio, but on-demand radio. I mean, if you think about it, there's a morning show, it can be 4 hours long, but if you condense the highlights of that show down into an hour or less or whatever, it's more easily consumable. They don't have to wait till the morning show gets their best of this weekend and stuff like that, and they can consume it whenever they want to. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. In fact, I'll go one further. You can actually put more in varying advertisements at different intervals and times that you can then monetize via your sponsorships and tell them that you have essentially perpetual advertising. Copyright 2007, Captain Mike.
Right. Exactly. And
yeah. And I mean, it's huge. It's we were just running through the there's a little board around the, in fact, here, I'll give you a little scoot. This board over here, we were just running through another guy that knows about radio and how to promote things, and is a self-acclaimed whore of being able to whore himself. And that's awesome. Mm-hmm. But what he's not familiar with are the different availabilities inside of the podcast vein.
I got you.
And I'm now glancing out of the corner of my eye. I really do have to apologize for the dance club. That's really, really strange.
That is, it's something how those LEDs will do that. And I think one thing that radio stations should not do is think of a podcast as radio. It doesn't have to be, if they're creating something from scratch, let's say a one-off show or something like that, then they don't have to, doesn't have to be as produced and to a finite, second mark, like commercials, let's say, have to, and shows have to. It doesn't have to be perfectly polished. Are you finding that some people will prepare and record and tweak and produce their shows?
Yeah, the stories of podcasting are legend, mostly because for those coming from a radio background, not only does it not have to be produced, it doesn't have to be inside of a radio window. For those that are not familiar with radio window, it's the whole 11, 8, 13, 8, whatever the wheel of awesome radio time is for you.
Yeah.
It does not have to be inside of that. And that's a very interesting skill set for people that are not familiar at all with that. I'm dealing a lot with that right now because the 3 people that I'm working with on cancelthisshow.com, they all are radio people. And it's not that they're going, okay, well, it's 8 minutes, so I stop talking now. That's not what they do either. What they're doing now is they're just continuing talking, but the segmentizing piece is still very, very alien to them. We've only been doing this live program now for 3 days live, and then for a series of samples, and then the 101 episode, which you can find either over on YouTube or via the website over at cancelthisshow.com. And I call it radio brain. I literally call it radio brain, where when you think radio, there are these things that are inside of it. And to be able to go in there and start not only modding, but evolving that model into something that's different, that is what I call the whole enchilada on the other side, it's a metamorphosis that always takes time.
Sure.
It's very frustrating on the front end, because when you're in radio brain, you're kind of locked into radio brain. And that's really what, if I had to tell radio stations now, I got to tell you guys, it might feel like easy money and you don't really care about anything of that new stuff because you're already getting the money for the old people. You got to evolve. If you don't evolve, it's a ticking time bomb. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, number 2 in our list of top 5 reasons why radio stations should get involved with podcasting is podcasts can build more intimate relationships with those listeners. Podcasts are the ideal place to build relationships because you can niche down to specific audiences if you want to, or you can super serve those fans of your shows, like the morning show that we talked about and that sort of thing. Are you agreeing with that?
I totally agree with that. In fact, again, I am an absolute product of niche podcasting fame. The 24 podcast is easily what generated Mike Wilkerson traffic and really my career for the last 18 years inside podcasting, where I can loop in marketing automation and web design and all these other things that I bothered to take the time and learn and implement. Mm-hmm. And without that niche to begin with, that I can then splash onto other things because the skill sets translate for me onto it, it's impossible. When somebody listens to a podcast about poker, they're not coming there to listen about 24. They're there to listen about poker. They're not there to learn about knitting. They're there to listen and know something else that they don't yet know, those light bulb moments about poker. Mm-hmm. And so you may not have like huge garganzo numbers, but what you do have is a completely dedicated audience that is not only listening to you, but you are instantly forming a relationship because of your perspective, your stories, and the chemistry set that happens between you and anybody that listens to the program.
Yeah, exactly. And just like radio, that is very personal because it's just you and your headphones, or you're in your car by yourself and that sort of thing. So what you're doing is you're making more opportunities to be intimate with those listeners.
There's no question. I mean, the best sample I can give you is I'm working with a gentleman named Vic Faust. Vic Faust is a now canceled Fox anchorman. And the whole thing about the canceled anchorman astronaut thing is he can now say things that he would have never been able to do or say or even lean towards inside of the typical box of you shall now get on television.
Yeah.
That instantly avails him a completely different perspective that everybody wants to know about because nobody's told this story yet. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing.
All right, let's go on down the list here. Number 3 in the reasons why radio stations should consider podcasting is consider them an extra marketing channel for everything that you're doing. People now spend most of their time on their phones, tablets. Podcasts are exactly about being where these listeners are and when they want to tune in. Similar to social media networks, we've always said that use the tools that you rent, like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and that sort of thing, to bring listeners back to the properties that you own, like your website. Well, podcasting is just another tool in your marketing arsenal that you can spread information about your radio shows and reach more listeners. That means those people that consume podcasts are going to listen more to the radio. They're going to make time to listen to the radio, and then the radio people are going to listen. Okay, let me go to the podcast to get more. And so it's a cycle that you can keep people engaged with your radio station longer. What do you think?
You keep explaining all the points. I'm not sure how much more you want me to give you. But no, this also bleeds kind of into that relationship that you can have inside of a podcast environment that you can't have elsewhere. One of the biggest things to remember is that the phones that all of us have in our pocket. I mean, like seriously, who does not have right now? I would realize if you're driving, don't go grab your phone, but grab your phone and pull it out of your pocket quick and show it to the camera, because everyone's got one. And so how do you get tethered to it? Radio has been scrambling for the last 5 to 7 years to try and figure out how to make this also be part of the radio verse. The problem is that the programming that they're issuing doesn't match this. Podcasting matches this. Podcasting allows you to jump into whatever topic you want to learn more about or hear more about instantly, right now. All you got to do is go and search for it. Radio is not that. Very often it's a couple of yahoos that are just kind of jacklegging on a series of microphones in his studio. And by the way, their radio clock is now ripped out, as are all the advertisements of the podcast segments that you're listening to. So what the hell are you listening to exactly? Usually it's kind of put to, it feels like, it's like when you look at a puzzle box and you go, oh, these are pretty cool pieces. What's the whole picture? And you turn the box over and it's like, hey, look, there's no picture. How the hell am I going to figure this out? And you don't really care because you've never thought of that. Well, it's time to start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And when radio stations finally figure that through, they're going to realize you got to have a picture. And the ability that podcasting allows for people to get a picture of what all the pieces parts are is far more intelligent and easy to consume inside of a device that everybody's got in their pocket.
That's right. You have to be where they are, even when they're not in front of a radio.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. Number 4 in our list was podcasts are easy for radio stations to promote. If you think about it, you don't have a radio station at your disposal, but radio stations do, so they can promote their different podcasts on their signal. What if you had a radio station to promote all of your podcasts?
This is a very interesting conversation because I think I've been to just about every single radio station in St. Louis. When I walk in, they're always concerned about how their message, especially inside of what they want to issue to podcasting, is going to be hit on their station tower abilities. And unless you've spent an oodle of money on a radio tower, I got to tell you, your 9 to 12 mile radius thing, it's not hitting a lot of people. I've always been a giant cynical soul of radio tower power dumb, because again, all I ask is, I want to know how many people are listening to you right now. Can you tell me what that number is real quick? And the answer can't be, oh, well, yeah, I've got this special magic black box that lives on my belt that's going to tell everyone what radio station I'm listening to. And hey, by the way, Mike Wilkerson doesn't listen to radio all day long because I don't listen to radio. So I guess I just won't get a box and it won't matter, right?
Yes.
And so that's the whole thing. I think that in general, demographics and ratings that are issued by radio are just they're made up. I can't go and ask somebody out in the hall here, hey, what radio station did you listen to today, and get a salient answer. Mm-hmm. They'll say, I think I was listening to insert name of radio station. And then I'll say, well, what were you listening to? And they can't tell me. Okay, that's not retention.
Right.
Now, if you were listening to a podcast about, 24, or about poker, or about watching TV, movies, and streaming media, and how law enforcement works for real, or how it doesn't work for real, like we do over at whatcopswatch.com, you're likely to remember something like that, where again, the back and forth jackassery on microphones inside of radio is something you're going to forget. It doesn't stick.
I see. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I was talking about there is that if you already have an audience, and your radio station has a new podcast that they're doing, they already have a vehicle to promote it within that audience.
To magic audience. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all right.
That's
good.
right.
All right. And lastly, and really the best of the reasons why radio stations should be getting into podcasting is that podcasts make money. You've been making money off of podcasts for the last 18 years.
Yep.
And it's true. And I think radio broadcasters will admit that a lot of people view the radio as just background noise. Podcasts have been shown to really cut through that because, as you said, they're intentional. They're listening to a podcast about 24 or poker or something like that. So they're going to be more apt to lean in to what they're listening to than somebody on just a radio station. And sure. Advertisers are getting on board with this also because they can select specific audiences to target. They can say, all right, I have this poker product or a course or whatever like that. I want to target a podcast that just talks about poker because I know everybody listening to that podcast is going to be my audience. If you're thinking about podcasts as a competition to your radio station, you're going to miss out on this additional income. What do you think about that?
The podcast mechanism and abilities need to be the primary marketing arm of anything, really. You instantly can convey perspective, insight, and skill sets via anything that you want to the people that are going to care about you. What that really also gives you is the ability to connect and have a relationship before the people even talk to you on the phone in regard to either business or whatever goes on inside of a radio station too.
Mm-hmm.
To not use it is ignorance. And I don't like ignorance, because why on earth, if you could, why would you not extend and want to try and make money utilizing a lot of the same things that you have in house? Many of the people that are on inside of radio stations, they've got other things that they do that they likely have a passion project about, that they would likely do a podcast and help you generate your own podcast network inside your radio station.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to have the discussion. Again, it goes back to that whole have the conversation thing. And until somebody's willing to have that conversation and then do something about it, which I think is where a lot of radio stations have a tough foothold, it's an uphill climb. And I just want people to understand, especially radio stations, that clipping out the stuff that you capture inside of a radio clock and throwing it into a podcast directory, I do not consider that a podcast. That's you ripping the content of your radio programming out and throwing it over into a directory. It needs to have specific content, commentary, and context. Otherwise, I don't consider that a piece of podcasting. Podcasting is not a simple dumping ground where you just dump a whole bunch of stuff and yay, we're podcasting. It's a story. It's a series of books. It's a library. And when you go into a library, what you don't want to do is go in there and like you grab any book and none of it really makes any sense, right? You want to grab the book and you want to get through reading in the book and you go, God, it's a good book. Where do I get another one like this one? Wait a minute. This guy wrote the same one. Let's see what that one's about. And that's the experience I try and tell everybody to have with podcasting, regardless of whether you're inside a radio set or not. Because when you start getting into being able to select content like that,
mm-hmm.
you'll never go back to radio. No matter, even if it's just during the drive time we're trying to match here. Something else. I remember when you dropped me the note about this interview, we're trying to get into where it's a commute and it's going to be digestible in a commute. And I got to tell you, sorry, it didn't happen. But what you did get that I love is you got an incredible piece of insight that will help people that have radio stations or are thinking about getting into radio stations have the conversation about podcasting.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Mike, for being on the podcast today. Look, tell everybody where they can get in contact with you.
Absolutely. What I'd love everyone to do is to go check out the Two Guys Talking Data Core. The Two Guys Talking Data Core is over at 2gtdatacore.com. To get there indirectly, you can go over to my website. That's twoguystalking.com. That's the number 2guystalking.com. You can also get it via TWO, but we're not going to talk about that right now. 2guystalking.com will get you to everywhere and everything, especially to contact me.
All right, so wrapping up, to stay ahead, radio needs to focus on what it does best and then just apply it to podcasting. Create podcasts based on the content that you're already creating there at the radio station or what ties in with your communities. Also look into creating podcasts for underserved audiences. Is there a particular audience in your market that is not being served with a radio station? That's a podcasting opportunity that you can take advantage of and start making that additional revenue from that, just as you would if you were just to create a new radio station. Perhaps you may want to, if you're thinking about creating a new radio station, test it out with a podcast. If the podcast is not popular, well, then that may give you the insight that you need before you jump in and make a format change. See what your team is passionate about and try to build an audio community around those in-house experts that you have already. Podcasters don't need to be air personalities, although studies have shown that more listeners would prefer that, but it doesn't have to be the case. That salesperson who always wanted to be on the radio but never really had the chops for it, if they have a great idea and they're passionate about something, that could be your next big podcast. So reach out to your team and see what they're passionate about, because more than likely, you probably have a big network of podcasts that is right there within your building right now. Now, it's true that just about everybody is starting a podcast right now, but don't let that be a stumbling block for you. Huge radio groups have seen that podcasts have become a huge revenue generator from them, and it's helped extend their reach far beyond their local market. So jump into it, and I know that you're going to do fantastic with it. Hey, if you need help with your website, be sure to reach out to us at skyrocketradio.com. Have an awesome week online making your radio station website better. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Better Radio Websites. Remember to subscribe, leave a rating or comment, and share this episode with your team and radio colleagues. For show notes, archived episodes, and more free resources, visit betterradiowebsites.com. Need help starting or making your radio website better? Visit skyrocketradio.com.